the unquenchable spirit of Anzac, the men of Australia and New Zealand were on the march again. The second AIF, though only a few months old, was striding forth to meet yet another challenge from Germany. In every capital city they marched. Grim-faced and resolute, they answered the call to arms. The Governor-General, Lord Gowrie, took the salute, a task he was to perform many times. Across the Tasman in Wellington, 2,000 men of the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force paraded before their ailing Prime Minister, Mr. Savage, prior to boarding the Cunard liner Mauretania. Their immediate destination was Sydney, to join the biggest troop convoy ever mustered in Australian waters. The wharves of Port Jackson were crammed by the men waiting to board the transports. They left without a cheer, cloaked in a blanket of secrecy. Anchored off Athol Bight, the grey bulk of the world's second largest ship, the Queen Mary, which had steamed into the harbour on the 16th of April from New York via the Cape. From ferries, the men poured into the bowels of the mighty 83,000-tonner to emerge on deck for a last view of their homeland. And then, on the 5th of May, they set sail for Palestine to complete training before joining the British Army in France, just as the men of the first AIF had done a quarter of a century before. Little did they know that only 40 days later, France was to capitulate, succumbing as Holland and Belgium had already done to the Nazi onslaught. The departure of the boys was the signal for the veterans of World War I to spring to it once again. They needed no second call. There was a job for them, even if age barred them from going overseas. Brigadier General Gordon Bennett, later to join the ill-fated 8th Division in Malaya, welcomed old comrades and listened to some creaky joints as they limbered up. They were flying high, but not quite as high as these young Air Force recruits. The first batch of trainees of the Empire Air Training Scheme, initiated by the Australian High Commissioner Stanley Bruce in London, and introduced simultaneously in Australia and Canada in April 1940.
Good luck. You've got very comfortable accommodation. I've looked at all your cabins. You've got telephones and various...
To boost Air Force strength, a special train was equipped, providing a mobile recruiting depot which traveled thousands of miles, stopping at towns large and small, and playing a major role on a campaign which was to lift the strength of the RAAF eventually to a peak of 180,000 men and women. A tremendous achievement when it's recalled that the RAAF had only 121 aircraft and 3,500 men when war was declared in September 1939. Inevitably, during training, there were crashes, but none more spectacular than at Wagga, when these two planes collided and became locked in mid-air. Crewmen bailed out, but the young pupil pilot of the top plane combined the controls of his aircraft with the engine power of the Underdog to bring them both safely back to Earth. Performed by trainee pilot L.G. Fuller, an unbelievable feat which staggered the world of aviation. On June 10th, 1940, 7 days before the fall of France, Italy entered the war on Hitler's side. Britain lost the support of the major part of the French fleet, and the opposition was strengthened by the powerful Italian navy. In the first cruiser duel of the war off the west coast of Crete, Sydney sank the Italian cruiser Bartolomeo Colleoni with gunfire and torpedoes. History had been repeated. The first HMAS Sydney had sunk the German raider Emden off Cocos Island in the Navy's initial clash with the enemy in World War I. Back home, jubilant crewmen set about getting the cruiser back to battle order. But the men were allowed time off for a triumphant march through the city to a civic reception by Lord Mayor Cripp. Also in the harbour at that time was the 5-masted City of Alberni, 97 days out of British Columbia, with 1.5 million super-feet of much-needed softwood from the fir forest of Canada. Sea Scots from Snapper Island were quick to seize the chance of inspecting at close quarters a real windjammer, realizing that this would be their only opportunity of ever sailing behind, up, or before the mast. there was no fun for Sea Scout or anyone else when this freighter caught fire off Barwon Heads, Victoria. A frightening spectacle, providing an unwanted display of fireworks as valuable crates of ammunition exploded. A grim reminder of the wartime dangers confronting the men of the Merchant Marine. And so a freighter died. But at Cockatoo Dock on February 10th, another ship was born.
I name this ship Warrego. I congratulate the workmen who have so skillfully and faithfully constructed her. May she prove a valuable addition to the Royal Australian Navy, and may God's protecting care be over all who voyage in her.
The wife of Prime Minister Menzies launched the sloop Warrego, a product of one of the many shipyards which had sprung to life around the coast from Maryborough in Queensland to Whyalla in South Australia. At an Australia Day dinner, the Prime Minister Robert Menzies was the guest speaker.
We hope to be able to establish a world in which Germany and ourselves will be friends, in which old hatreds will be forgotten, in which we will say there can be no real peace without real understanding, and there can be no real understanding if we are to allow our actions to be informed by malice. Let us fight hard, gentlemen. Australia will. But I say on her behalf, and I'm sure on yours, that hard as she will fight, determined as she will be to win, she will fight without malice because she looks for a peace that will last.
Any enthusiasm or optimism inspired by this speech was nullified by one of the most disastrous air crashes in Australian history. In perfect weather, an Air Force Lockheed Hudson completing a flight from Melbourne was about to land at Canberra when it suddenly spiraled into a stump-studded hillside. In a few seconds, the aircraft was a blazing inferno. 10 men died, 3 of them senior federal ministers. Among the victims, the Minister for the Army, Mr. G.S. Street. The Vice President of the Executive Council, Sir Henry Gullett, here with the late Prime Minister Lyons. Chief of the General Staff, General Brudenell White. And the first man to hold the portfolio of Minister for Air, Mr. J.B. Fairbairn. A tragic loss inflicted upon the whole Commonwealth at the height of the war crisis. Just 2 weeks before Dr. Evatt announced his resignation from the High Court bench to become an official Labour Party candidate.
After 10 years on the Supreme Judicial Bench of the Commonwealth, it is not easy to say goodbye, but the present emergency is so great that everyone must do his duty as he sees it before him.
A few weeks later, with Britain fighting for her life, Australia was fighting an election. But Australians were under no illusions of remoteness from the Empire's life and death struggle as they went to the polls to decide whether Mr. Menzies was entitled to carry on or whether Labour was to be entrusted with the management of the war effort. Servicemen had their first wartime vote. Party strength was so evenly divided that the balance of power was held by 2 Victorian independents. A precarious state of affairs for Mr. Menzies. Labour leader John Curtin had to wait another 10 months before he became Prime Minister. After a construction period extending over 7 years, Western Australia's greatest water storage scheme was completed. The state's outstanding engineering project, the Canning Dam. Premier Wilcock performed the opening ceremony. A massive yet gracefully curved 1,400 feet wall of concrete to bank up a 1,500-acre lake storehouse of 20.5 billion gallons. For 5 years, Brisbane had been watching the growth of the Story Bridge, the second largest cantilever span in Australia, built to a design conceived by Dr. Bradfield, who, with Queensland's Premier Forgan Smith, watched the Governor, Sir Leslie Wilson, declare it open for traffic, and then lead the way across the great structure spanning the Brisbane River. A mass of concrete and steel, Steel from Newcastle, where the mills were on a new job rolling out white-hot metal into sheets, toughened and tempered by being plunged into water. Next, the sheets passed to the giant press, which stamped out, of all things, steel helmets. Then they encountered their first gun, a spray gun, firing nothing more lethal than paint. Newcastle took care of our soldiers' heads, and Melbourne handled their feet. After all, Napoleon, an army really marches on its feet. It's the strength of the soul that counts most, and these machinists saw that our servicemen were well shod. Just as a stockpile of boots was built up, so were supplies of wheat. Here at Homebush, bags by the million were stacked. Wartime wealth of a rich continent. Not a job for a white-collar worker, this, but one which called for abnormal strength and the knack which makes it look so easy. Food for a nation and an empire. To meet the demand for timber, Victorian lumbermen moved into Gippsland, where a year previously bushfire had wrought widespread havoc. In its wake remained countless forest giants, blackened and dead, doomed to rot unless felled. So skywards climbed spike-booted woodmen, first to lop the tops and then crash the trunks. But this dangerous salvage operation was designed not only to provide construction material, the wood was burned to produce charcoal, a wartime scheme to conserve rationed petrol. And it worked. The charcoal was bagged and used in burners attached to motor vehicles of all types. And how those poor engines suffered by the change of diet from petrol to charcoal gas. The slogan each and every day throughout the continent was, "Waste not, want not," and Australia wants your waste. So Boy Scouts and Girl Guides in Adelaide didn't waste any time. They set an example with an organized collection of anything and everything, which in pre-war days would have finished up on the tip. School children were the most enthusiastic collectors, dumping their bags of rags at depots to be transformed into cotton waste to keep the wheels of essential industries running smoothly. And from the British Isles came more children on a Polish ship evacuated temporarily by their parents to escape the savage bombing raids of Hitler's Luftwaffe. Straight out of the Blitz area they came, even bringing their gas masks with them. And a few ideas about Adolf, too.
How do you like being in Australia, Margaret?
I like it very much, but I wish my mother and father were with me too.
What I'm looking forward to is the lights in the night. It's a long time since I've seen them.
I come from Leith in Scotland. I saw the first air raid there was, but I wasn't scared.
We won't need this gas mask anymore.
Very good.
We're a long, long way from Hitler now. I think he's an awful twerp.
Free from the threat of air raids, a tough hill climbing contest was staged at Baden in Queensland. It attracted the local daring young men on their wingless flying machines. On a grade of 1 in 1.5, they did everything but fly. Now, how about another try? One last go, and he'll make it. That's what you think. Righto, mate. How about reverse? Guns were in the news, but not this type. A blowgun made by Major Joss of Brisbane, who copied an ancient weapon used by natives in Borneo to fire poison darts. But the Major adapted the lethal weapon for sport, a new slant on archery. No need for poison when you're aiming at a target, or an apple. Yes, William lived to tell. Flemington Racecourse on the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes Day and a wartime Melbourne Cup. For one day, servicemen concentrated on beating the books rather than the enemy. And as the horses paraded before going to the start, for just a few minutes, the war was forgotten. Cities and towns stopped dead. The annual listen-in strike was on. In the straight, it's pan-decked on the inside, but Bo Lever with the check jacket and bandaged legs takes over. But watch old Rolly making light of his 7 years. He passes Bo Lever, and there's Mackay with the dark jacket out wide putting in his claim. But it's old Rolly who wins from Mackay, with Tidal Wave flashing up into third place. What a turn-up. Old Rolly at 100 to 1. No wonder jockey Andy Knox was smiling. Boxing fans were lucky to see one of the most durable and exciting fighters of all time when the U.S. Negro Archie Moore met Ron Richards before a crowd of 12,000 at the Sydney Stadium. A thrilling display of power punching. Moore was 27 at the time and both in world class. But it was not until 12 years later that Moore won the light heavyweight title from Joey Maxim. Richards retired in 1943, but the amazing ageless Moore carried on until 1963. An unbelievable 27-year career of 226 fights, of which he lost only 17. In a return bout with Richards, Moore gained a close points decision. But in this encounter, with both eyes opened, Richards was battered into submission in 10 rounds. A memorable bout in one of the most colourful eras of Australian boxing. When it came to winning on points, the wizard of the queue, the one and only Walter Lindrum, was a knockout. And what a warrior he was during those war years. He fired cannons by the thousand, nursery cannons, and thousands paid to see him do it. The gate takings going to the Comforts Fund. Lindrum travelled the length and breadth of Australia, demonstrating his uncanny and unmatched mastery of billiards. In Melbourne on July 31st, 1940, Lindrum competed in a match against his brother Fred, lasting 2 hours and 28 minutes, with only one spell. Despite the new rule limiting consecutive cannons or hazards to 15, he set a world record break of 3,361. And when it came to trick shots, it was in the bag. Shades of 1914-18. Australians were back in the Middle East. Men of the 6th Division, just as their forebears had done, were turning up in the land of sun and sand for the inevitable battle ahead. Sweat marches through the dunes, across the arid wastelands. It was a cold war in Europe, but here the heat was on in more ways than one. The light horse of yesteryear was replaced by the mechanized cavalry, at this stage confined mostly to Breton carriers and a few tanks. "5,000 nursing sisters joined the three services, and one of their first detachments paraded at Liverpool camp on January the 7th, 1940. 53 Army nurses were to lose their lives.
It is our intention, as far as is within our power, to carry on the traditions of the AIF nurses who went to the Great War in 1914 and 18. And I'm sure we'll all do our best for everyone.
Men must eat, and the women folk were called upon to lift the gastronomic standards of the army, to teach the men some tricks of the culinary art. Their pupils came from all walks of life, eager to prove that a woman was not the only person whose place was in the kitchen. After all, at 50 cents a day, these chaps certainly needed the dough.
Not exactly, Lord.
Well, how am I going to do?
Turn the outside edges into the center, then you avoid a tough mixture. Eh?
In Victoria, physical culture instructors were brought up to date in the latest methods of pepping up tired muscles. Test spinner Fleetwood Smith, now a sergeant major, showed that he'd lost none of his skill at twirling a ball. Professional wrestlers Bonnie Muir and King Elliott forsook the prize ring to do their bit in an impromptu rough and tumble. The referee lost his shirt on the result. Yes, the accent was on physical fitness, and as part of the campaign, directed at civilians and servicemen alike, demonstrations were given throughout the country. The slogan, health for a whole nation. The trainees were girls from city firms, symbols of healthy Australian womanhood. In another field, a much less glamorous task was attacked with just as much enthusiasm. Dame Enid Lyons, widow of former Prime Minister Joe Lyons, and soon to become the first woman elected to the House of Representatives, inspected the tractor drivers of the Victorian Women's Auxiliary Training League. Women soldiers on the home front, carrying on the primary industries, learning to operate the agricultural machinery, to replace the men who were joining the armed services. A vital necessity in the nation's all-out war effort. Yes, it was also a woman's war, and the Red Cross again answered the call. New South Wales Governor's wife, Lady Wakehurst, inspected a detachment of VADs at Victoria Barracks. VADs were to serve in the Middle East, hospital ships, and in most of the war zones of the Pacific in the years to come. But this march was confined to the barrack square, just a stroll compared with the walk which faced the men of the newly formed 7th Division. To speed up the toughening up process, the Army brass decided to move more than 4,000 men to a new camp at Bathurst on foot, a maneuver given the widest publicity. Divisional Commander Lieutenant General Laverick and the commanding officer of the 20th Brigade, Brigadier Murray, supervised the 130-mile march, the longest ever undertaken by the Australian Army. Medical officers made sure that all these little piggies were absolutely fit to go to market. And so they set forth, the 2nd 13th Battalion leading, followed by the boys of the 2nd 17th 2 days later. Up the Mitchell Pass they trudged, following the track blazed by the famous explorers Blackland, Lawson and Wentworth. Months of training at Ingleburn had them in fine fettle. Katoomba, and the town was waiting. The Blue Mountains folk turned it on for them during their 24-hour spell. Food and fun, and of all things, a dance. A dance for those who could take it. And if your boots didn't pinch your toes, your mate pinched your girl. Then it was time for a bit of shut-eye. Obviously a Highlander. Who said it was a dog's life? Well, it was a pretty comfy one for Whiskey, the battalion mascot, at least until they hit the road again. It was 12 days after leaving Ingleburn before the boys got their first glimpse of their goal across the rolling Bathurst plains. It was a tribute to the careful planning and organization by the brass hats that the first men marched into their new camp right on the scheduled minute. And it spoke volumes for the fitness of the hikers that there was only one casualty en route. Leaving the dance at Katoomba, one chap fell and broke his arm. Sunset on the evening of the 19th of August, 1940, as the battalion flag was lowered, the notes of a bugle heralded the close of the first chapter in the glorious history of the 2nd 13th and 2nd 17th Battalions, who, with many other thousands of the flower of young Australian manhood, were to be linked in the next 6 years with unswerving devotion and determination to keep the home fires burning. In 1940, a year to remember.